Welcome to RuralStrong, where we talk real challenges and bold solutions in rural economic development. I'm your host, Joe Barker. Let's get into it. This is Joe Barker, your RuralStrong podcast host, and we're today broadcasting from the Southwest Tennessee Development District podcast studio in lovely downtown Jackson, Tennessee. And, you know, one of our missions on RuralStrong is to bring successful, experienced economic developers from across the country to our program to talk about their region and to talk about innovative programs they have and successes and challenges. And we are really going across the country today. We're going all the way to Havre, Montana, and our special guest today is a good friend of mine, Paul Tuss. Welcome, Paul.
Oh, hello there. It's so good to be on here with you, and you're correct. Tennessee is a little down the road from Montana.
Well, it is. I mean, I wouldn't want to get in my car and drive there in the next day or two, but I know it's beautiful country and it's a beautiful time of the year. Let me tell our listeners a little bit about you, Paul. Paul is in his 25th year as Executive Director of Bear Paw Development Corporation, which is Montana's longest-serving economic development district. It covers over 17,000 square miles. They serve 5 counties and 2 Indian reservations in northern Montana. Paul is the past president of the Montana Economic Developers Association and served as a member of the board of directors of the Montana Nonprofit Association. He is currently a member of the board of directors of the National Association of Development Organizations and previously held gubernatorial appointments to the Montana Tourism Advisory Council and Montana Judicial Nomination Commission. And if that's not enough, Paul is currently serving his second term as a member of the Montana House of Representatives. So, Paul, tell us a little bit about the Bear Paw Economic Development Corporation.
Yeah, Joe, thank you for that introduction. That's very kind of you. As you mentioned in the introduction, Bear Paw Development Corporation is Montana's longest-serving economic development district. We've been around since the late 1960s. And so our region is not just rural, but honestly, given the federal classifications, we're more frontier than rural. As you very eloquently indicated, we cover an area here in northern Montana of 17,000 square miles, but within that geography, there's only 35,000 people in the whole region. So we truly are a pretty sparsely populated area. Where we are currently located, Joe, is in Havre, as you talk about. We are the largest community in this 5-county region, and we have a population of just under 10,000 people. 4 of our counties actually butt up against Canada. Where I'm sitting right now is about 35 miles from the Canadian border. And it's a beautiful area, and I can tell you right now, I'm looking out my office window. It's an absolutely gorgeous fall day in northern Montana.
Well, I know, Paul, you're a Montana native, and being from Montana, how has that influenced your commitment to the region's economic well-being?
I'm a multi-generation native Montanan. My family goes back multiple generations, particularly in western Montana. And rural is in my bones. Rural is absolutely in my DNA. And sometimes the economy of our region can be challenging. And that's not just for Montana or our region of Montana. That's nationwide and, in fact, globally. So when you come from those roots, when you come from an area that is sparsely populated, that's rural, that perhaps doesn't have some of the economic advantages of other areas, you want to do what you can. You want to do what you absolutely can to help the businesses, the institutions, and the people of this region. And that's what I hope I've been doing for the last 25 years as executive director.
Well, Paul, the Bear Paw Development Corporation is a private nonprofit corporation, and reading a little bit about your organization, you operate independently of local, state, and federal government entities. So, where does your revenue come from, and how does being independent of those entities, do you see that as a plus, or does it create its own challenges?
Let me take your second question first. We are an independent nonprofit 501c3 organization as recognized by both the federal and state government. And that does provide us the independence that we need to really act in the best interests of our region, of the businesses here, of the projects we work on, of the communities we serve, and of course the people that live in our district. So we are not influenced, fortunately, by the politics that seem to come and go at the federal level or the politics that seem to come and go at the state level. And really the nonprofit status of our organization, the independent status of our organization has served us well for 55 years now. Joe, what was your first part of that question?
Well, I was just asking the fact that since you work independent of those entities, where do you receive your revenue?
And even though we work independently and our decisions are made independently, including a 24-member board of directors, we just had our board meeting last week, in fact, that doesn't mean that we don't receive financial compensation from local governments, and because we do. In fact, we ask a lot of our local governments on an annual basis to contribute dues to our organization, and that's certainly one of our revenue streams. But as an economic development district, as you know, we also receive federal funding from the Economic Development Administration. We are a certified regional development corporation as certified by the state of Montana. There's grant funding that comes along with that. But over and above all of that, one of the largest revenue streams that we have is we have a fairly mature revolving loan fund that we started in the late 80s. And we have done hundreds of loans to small businesses in our region. And the interest off of those loans help us keep the lights on here. So the revolving loan fund is a very important part of our revenue stream. We also are a regional center for the Small Business Development Center. And in Montana, we also have 10 or 11 food and ag development centers that focus exclusively on value-added agriculture. And we have a grant from the Montana Department of Agriculture that helps assist entrepreneurs and farmers and ranchers with their value-added ag projects.
And I know ag is highly important in your region, just like it is to us here in Southwest Tennessee. And you've been involved and I know in several entities in food processing. Can you give us an example of some of the agribusinesses you've been involved with?
Yeah, we are in the heart of agricultural country here in northern Montana. And our area is also known as the Highline. So if I refer to our area as the Highline, you'll know what I'm talking about. We grow a lot of wheat here, Joe. In fact, one of our counties, Choteau County, I believe, is the number one producer of a particular variety of wheat in the entire nation. There are a lot of cattle up in our neck of the woods as well. One of the things that we recently were very pleased to invest in through our revolving loan fund and a program that you may be familiar with through the auspices of USDA Rural Development at the federal level is we received a very significant $10 million MPELT grant. MPELT is Meat and Poultry Intermediary Lending Program. So we received funding from the federal government and we relent that to entities that want to process poultry or meat, beef. And in this particular case, we worked with a cooperative here in Havre that recently started processing beef. Excuse me, Joe. And they are in the process of not just starting that up, but working with farmers in our area to process their beef. And so that cattle doesn't have to be shipped out of state for processing. And all that does, Joe, is add value to the bottom line for those particular ranchers.
You mentioned your revolving Loan Fund, and let's dive into that a little bit. Do you help very small businesses on up to large businesses? Do you have a structure about the amount that you can loan? And tell us a little bit how that process works.
We've been in the business of lending money to businesses in our region since the late 80s. We have capitalized our revolving loan fund at approximately $20 million, which, if you think about how rural our area is, if you think about how small our communities are, $20 million goes a long way in rural northern Montana, I can tell you that. And we have done some very large loans to companies that are doing incredible things. And we have lent money in very small amounts to startup businesses that are also in their own way doing incredible things, but the dollar amount is simply less. And we do everything, Joe, from facade development for downtown revitalization to industries such as what we just talked about with beef processing that are global in nature. Manufacturing, for instance. We have a manufacturing firm here in our community in Havre that manufactures tractors. And they're a long-term client of Bear Paw Development. So really, it's soup to nuts in terms of startup businesses and those mature businesses that just need a little bit more capital to do something new and innovative.
Isn't it gratifying, Paul, particularly to see that small business, that startup you mentioned, become a success? I know with our revolving loan fund, and certainly we don't have the portfolio that you do here at our organization, but I know nothing that gives us greater gratification than to see that startup be a success.
Isn't that true? I mean, oftentimes what we have, and I'll bet you this happens in your organization, Joe, you have somebody from the local community that darkens your doorstep. They come in and they have a great idea, and it really is a great idea, but they don't know how to get from point A to point B. And we hold their hand throughout this process. We help them with business plan development through our Small Business Development Center. And then we can literally walk them across the hallway to our loan department and see if we can invest financially in that idea. And oftentimes what will happen, too, are these small businesses become larger businesses, they become more bankable, and they end up being in the portfolio of a bank instead of in our portfolio, and that is a success.
And many times they're the heartbeat of the local communities. They employ local people, and it's so important. Let's move a little bit. Something unique, I think, about your organization is the fact that you mentioned that you actually serve 2 Indian reservations in northern Montana. Talk about your work with them, the relationship you have with them, and how that process works.
Our region is so culturally rich, and in many, many ways, we're culturally rich because we've got these 2 incredible Indian reservations really in our backyard. Havre, where I'm sitting right now, is strategically located between 2 of them, the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation to our east and the Rocky Boys Reservation that's just a little bit south of Havre, where I'm sitting right now. And these 2 entities were foundational members of Bear Paw Development when we started in the late 60s. So we have a relationship that literally spans decades. And an interesting project that I'd love to talk about is just last week we did a wonderful groundbreaking ceremony for a new wellness center on the southern end of the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation in very, very frontier communities called Hayes and Lodgepole. And they are in dire need of the services that will be provided to the members of the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation, the residents of that reservation, as well as off-reservation folks as well. But it's so nice to be able to partner with these Indian reservations, to be able to bring our expertise at project management to some of the funding that they can secure because of their status as a sovereign nation. And there's really some magic when that connection happens.
Paul, when you speak of the Indian reservations, from your perspective, what are some of the greatest challenges they have in moving forward economically?
In many ways, in all reality, some of the most challenging economic situations that occur in our region, and I think throughout any state that has Indian reservations, with some exception, is the economic doldrums that occur on those reservations. Oftentimes, they don't have the economies that are as mature as the off-reservation areas. The unemployment is high. So we try to work wherever we can with tribal leadership and their executives to secure funding and really build from within the economies of those areas. Because, like I said, they add so much, not just to the economy of our area, but to the cultural richness of our region.
I know it's exciting to work in that arena. Let me ask you this. You know, in our part of the country, many times organizations like ourselves, we work with institutions of higher education to partner with them, particularly on some complex projects. Does Bear Paw, or do they have that opportunity to partner with some higher education institutions?
Sure do. We have got 3 higher educational institutions in our region. One is a member of the Montana University System, and that's Montana State University Northern, and that's located here in Havre. It's a small 4-year college that has about 1,000 students. And then the other 2, Joe, directly relate to the conversation we just had about tribal governance. Very dynamic organizations exist at both of the reservations in our economic development district that are tribal colleges. And both Fort Belknap and Rocky Boy have tribal colleges. And that's where a lot of the workforce development initiatives, as well as just preparing people for the world of work, occur in our region.
We're speaking today with Paul Tuss, who is the Executive Director of the Bear Paw Development Corporation in Havre, Montana. And Paul, how do you define success for Bear Paw Development Corporation? Would you measure it in jobs created, business funded, or is it something else entirely?
Success can be defined a lot of different ways, and I think it's true to say that success is in the eye of the beholder. And Joe, as somebody that's been involved in economic development as long as you and I have, you also know that sometimes success at the outset might not look like success. In other words, if somebody comes in and they think they have a great idea for a business and they want to plop down their life savings into this wonderful idea they have, after we go through the process of maybe helping them develop a business plan, we may come to the conclusion, and they may come to the conclusion that, you know, I really haven't thought about everything. I really need to think this through a little bit more. And you know what, Joe? That's a success. Not having somebody invest their life savings in something that might not materialize and on paper doesn't, that just saved them a lot of heartache and a lot of money. But let me get back to the core question. I think success is when we have active, involved communities. I mean, we can talk all day about the investments that we make in businesses. We can talk about, we have a very large infrastructure portfolio and those type of successes. But I think at the end of the day, success for an economic or community developer is, do we have a vibrant, active community? Do we have people that love to live in this community? Do we have people that like their neighbors? Do we have people that just are really invested in the place that they live? And I think if the answer is yes to those type of questions, I think that's success.
I love that answer, Paul, because I agree with you 100%. You know, I've often said, particularly in my background when I was a local elected official, that, you know, we look on our community sometimes just like we look on our children. Is I might say something bad about the community, but I don't want anybody else to. and we all
That's
have
so true.
a passion for where we live. And I think people like yourself, and particularly local elected officials, those that have that passion for their community are the ones that end up successful in whatever their field they're in.
That's the truth. Yeah, it really is. Success begets success. And you get to the point of achieving success by people that are they want to roll up their sleeves. They're not afraid of getting their hands dirty, and they want to make things better for their neighborhood, for their community, for their neighbors.
Absolutely. Paul, having been in your area and a native Montana, and being involved in economic development for so long, what are some of the most, would you say, significant changes you've seen in northern Montana's economy and just the community over the years?
One of the things that is undeniable is the realization as time marches on about how globalized our economy really is. And that dropping a pebble in the pond over here is going to have that ripple effect that impacts a much larger area than the place where you drop that pebble. And so even though you look at the foundation of our economy up here, and we'll talk about agriculture or transportation or manufacturing or whatever it is, you look at the communities that I serve, and it doesn't take you very long to understand that it truly is rural and it truly is frontier. But the global economy has a significant impact on the bottom line of so many businesses in our area. And when we talk about agriculture, there's been a lot of conversation in the news recently about tariffs and trade wars and what other countries are doing and what our country is doing. That impacts Farmer Joe. That impacts the rancher who's trying to export their beef out of country. And so we're so interconnected these days. And I can't speak to times prior to when I became executive director here, but it's incredibly obvious to me that our little rural area is as connected as ever to the global economy.
Isn't it amazing? I agree with you. With today's technology, we are global wherever we are. And there was a question that I wanted to ask you with several of your counties bordering Canada. Is there commerce that's going back and forth across the border between the two countries?
Yes, Joe, Canada, by a long shot, is Montana's number one trading partner. In fact, if you were to put all of the next 9 significant trading partners for Montana together, they would not equal the international trade that we have with Canada. So they're good neighbors. They've been here forever too, Joe. And, it's fun. We're close enough to Canada that we go up there socially. There's a lot of folks in our neck of the woods that go up there on long weekends. Same is true with Canadians coming down here. So there's a friendliness between the two nations in our area. But economically, Canada is king.
Another question I want to talk about, because you are unique in a lot of ways, Paul, but one thing you're really unique in is that not only do you serve in a role of economic development, but you're also serve in the Montana House of Representatives. Tell our listeners how you got involved in the political world, and I guess what I want to lead up to is, do you think your experience in government helps assist your work in economic development, and vice versa, your economic development work assist your role in government?
It does, and I think it goes both ways. I think that as a politician, and some people shy away from that word, but I don't, as an elected official, every 2 years, and that's my election cycle, every 2 years, Joe, I have to go door to door and convince my constituents that I'm still worthy of their support and that I'm still worthy of their vote. And I can tell you, based on the conversations that I'm having at their doorstep or in their garages or on their front lawn, I have a far better idea, in my opinion, of what makes this community tick. What are the concerns of these people? What are the issues that keep people awake at night? What do they worry about for their families? And so I honestly believe that I'm a better economic developer because I'm also a public official that takes my responsibility very seriously. And every 2 years, I have to once again prove myself to the voters of this particular district. So I do think it goes both ways. And of course, my 25 and actually 30 years of experience in economic development that I have really sheds a lot of light on policies that I believe in this case, the state of Montana can enact that help entrepreneurs, that help communities, that help build infrastructure, and just make life a little bit easier for the people of Montana.
Well, Paul, I would think someone in your professional position and also being in the Montana state legislature that particularly bills that come up concerning business or rural development, whatever it might be, that you've got to be a valuable resource for those folks that work in the state capitol.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Joe. I think it is helpful. I happen to serve for the last 2 sessions on what's known as the Long Range Planning Subcommittee of Appropriations Committee in the House. And of course, appropriations is where all the money goes, and the appropriations is where the state of Montana decides to spend its dollars. And in the long range planning arena, we deal a lot with infrastructure. We deal a lot with buildings for the university system, but we also deal with things like water systems and sewer systems and dams and irrigation projects. And so the things that aren't necessarily as sexy as you might want them to be, but man, without those type of projects, Joe, you and I both know we're not going to have communities of any nature at all. So I'm very happy to bring the experience that I have in infrastructure development as an economic developer to my work as a Montana legislator.
Speaking of infrastructure, and I think this is a challenge all across the country, I'd like to get your thoughts on just housing in general. Is there enough available housing in your region, or is that a real challenge for you?
It's a real challenge, and it doesn't matter if you go to the very smallest community in our region or the largest. And I'll bet the same is true of any other economic development district, certainly in Montana and perhaps the nation. We've got not just a housing problem, but in my opinion, perhaps a housing crisis. And it has to do with the availability of any housing whatsoever, but it also has to do with the quality of the housing, right? There's a lot of folks that need housing that perhaps are new to our community, and there might be housing at the higher end that they can't afford, and there might be housing available at the very low end that's not that livable. So we have got to figure out how to crack this nut. We have got to collectively have to figure out a solution to the housing problem, and I know it's bigger than just us.
Well, you're exactly right, Paul. In our region here, our communities want to grow. I know our local leadership wants their communities to have the right kind of growth. But if there's no place for people to live, it's hard to have any growth whatsoever. We're just about at the end of our segment, and I want to ask you this from someone with your years of experience, and I know you've seen a lot of ups and downs. If you could look into your crystal ball, what do you see as the future economic status for the state of Montana, say over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think it's very bright. I really do. Montana, Joe, has been discovered. There's something that we talk about internally here in Montana that we refer to as the Yellowstone effect. In fact, I think maybe you and I have talked a little bit about it.
We have. That's one reason I wanted to come to Montana, and you told me come for any other reason but that.
Oh my goodness, Joe, I am guilty, and I think I told you this. I am guilty of not having watched one episode of Yellowstone, and when people hear that, they're going to gasp. But that has had a real impact on Montana. And by the way, it's not just Yellowstone. We call it the Yellowstone effect, but Montana has been discovered for a lot of different reasons, which obviously is good and bad, right? When people go to their local fishing hole that they've been going to for 60 years, and there might be another person there, or when all of a sudden their commute takes not 5 minutes, but 8 minutes, people get a little hot about that, particularly when you're from a rural state like Montana. So we're experiencing certainly some of the growth challenges that comes with being discovered. But as we know, as economic developers, that's a golden opportunity for us too. How do we harness what's positive about that and make that an important part in a controlled way of our economy? We obviously want to grow economically, but we don't want that to get out of control, right? And we don't want to push native Montanans out as we have new residents coming in. So I look at the future of Montana and our economy as very bright, but we got to be smart about it too.
Well, it's been a fascinating conversation, and we could talk for hours with Paul Tuss. He's a man of great knowledge, has great institutional knowledge, and does a great job. Paul, if any of our listeners wanted to find out a little bit more about Bear Paw Development Corporation, what website could they go to?
Would go to bearpaw.org. That's bearpaw.org.
Well, I encourage our folks to do that and read about the good things they're doing at Bear Paw Development Corporation. And I remind our listeners we welcome your comments or questions, and you can reach us at RuralStrong@gmail.com. Paul, thanks for being our guest, and have a great career there in Montana.
Thank you, Joe. It has been an honor. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for joining us on Rural Strong. If you found this helpful, share it and follow the show for more insights from rural leaders making a real difference. Until next time, stay rural strong.